जय राधा माधवा कुंज विहारी जय राधा माधवा कुंज विहारी गोपी जनवल्लभा गिरिवरधारी गोपी जनवल्लभा गिरिवरधारी यशोदनन्दना व्रजजनरञ्जना यशोदानन्दना व्रजजनरञ्जना यशोदानन्दना व्रजजनरञ्जना यमुनातिरावनचारी यमुनातिरावनचारी जय राधा माधवा कुंज विहारी गोपी जनवल्लभा गिरिवरधारी यशोदनन्दना व्रजजनरञ्जना यमुनातिरावनचारी जय राधा माधवा कुंज विहारी जय राधा माधवा कुंज विहारी ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय। ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय। ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय। नारायणं नमस्कृत्य नरं चैव नरोत्तमं देवीं सरस्वतीं व्यासं ततो जयमुदीरयेत्। नष्टप्रायेषु भद्रेषु नित्यं भागवत सेवया भगवतीरुत्तमश्लोके भक्तिर्भवति नैष्टिकी। कृष्णाय वासुदेवाय देवकीनन्दनाय च नन्दगोपकुमाराय गोविन्दाय नमो नमः। हरे कृष्ण। So we will continue our discussion from Srimad Bhagavatam, first canto, 15th chapter, titled The Pandavas Retired Timely, text number 30. Geetam Bhagavata Jnanam Yatyat Sangrama Murdhani कालकर्मतमोरुद्धं पुनरद्यगमत् प्रभुः गीतं भगवता ज्ञानं यत्तत्सङ्ग्राममूर्धनि 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 कालकर्मतमोरुद्धं पुनरद्यगमत् प्रभुः माताजी गीतं भगवता ज्ञानं यत्तत्सङ्ग्राममूर्धनि कालकर्मतमोरुद्धं पुनरद्यगमत् प्रभुः. Word to word meanings. Geetam, instructed. Bhagavata, by the personality of Godhead. Jnanam, transcendental knowledge. Yat, which. Tat, that. Sangrama Murdani, in the midst of battle. Kala karma, time and actions. Tamoruddham, enwrapped by such darkness. Punar Adyagamat, revived them again. Prabhuhu, the Lord of his senses. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. Because of the Lord's pastimes and activities, and because of his absence, it appeared that Arjuna forgot the instructions left by the personality of Godhead. But factually, this was not the case. And again he became Lord of his senses. Purport. A conditioned soul is enwrapped in his fruitive activities by the force of eternal time. But the Supreme Lord, when he incarnates on the earth, is not influenced by Kala or the material conception of past, present, and future. The activities of the Lord are eternal, and they are manifestations of his Atma Maya or internal potency. All pastimes or activities of the Lord are spiritual in nature, but to the layman, they appear to be on the same level with material activities. It so appeared that Arjuna and the Lord were engaged in the battle of Kurukshetra, as the other party was also engaged. But factually, the Lord was executing his mission of incarnation and association with his eternal friend Arjuna. Therefore, such apparently material activities of Arjuna did not drive him away from his transcendental position, but on the contrary, revived his consciousness of the songs of the Lord as he sang them personally. This revival of consciousness is assured by the Lord in Bhagavad Gita as follows. Manmana bhava madbhakto madhyaji mam namaskuru mame vaishyasi satyam te pratijane prayosime. One should think of the Lord always. The mind should not forget him. One should become a devotee of the Lord and offer obeisances unto him. One who lives in that fashion becomes undoubtedly endowed with the blessings of the Lord by achieving the shelter of his lotus feet. There is nothing to doubt about this eternal truth. Because Arjuna was his confidential friend, the secret was disclosed to him. Arjuna had no desire to fight with his relatives, but he fought for the mission of the Lord. He was always engaged in the execution of his mission only, and therefore, after the Lord's departure, he remained in the same transcendental position, even though it appeared that he forgot all the instructions of the Bhagavad Gita. One should therefore adjust the activities of life in pace with the mission of the Lord. And by doing this, one is sure to return back home, back to Godhead. This is the highest perfection of life. Om Ajnanatimirandasya Jnananjanashalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamahyam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guroh Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunatanvitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakanvitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindho Deenabandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhano Sute Devi Pranamami Haripriye Vancha Kalpa Tarubhyascha Kripa Sindubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shrivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna. So we will continue this discussion of how Arjuna is remembering smaranam and meditating on his exchanges with Krishna. That's what we have been discussing for the last couple of weeks at least. So today I was thinking we will speak on this theme of smaranam. So, or dhyanam, smaranam, dhyanam is the, little advanced stage of smaranam. So, Srila Rupa Goswami in his Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu defines these two. He says, what is smaranam? He says, yata katam chinmanasa sambandha smritir uchyate. What is smaranam? He says, somehow or other connecting the mind to the Lord is called as remembrance. And what is dhyanam? He says, dhyanam rupa guna krida sevadehe sushtu chintanam. Sushtu chintanam means to contemplate with absorption. Right? So, dhyanam is a more deeper level of smaranam. But both involve the mind. Both involve the mind. So, therefore, our acharyas explain that even though smaranam as a limb is presented as a part of sadhana bhakti, but generally, smaranam or dhyanam is possible only in the later stages of sadhana bhakti and not in the early stages of sadhana bhakti. So, smaranam is more of a limb which is actually suggested by our acharyas as a prominent limb for practicing raganuga sadhana bhakti, which is generally practiced beyond the level of nishta. So at the level of Vaidhi sadhana bhakti, smaranam is generally difficult for various reasons. So today we will discuss on these two topics, two subtopics about Smaranam. First, we will try to understand what is the qualification for Smaranam. And then we will discuss how do we attain that qualification. So, Srila Rupa Goswami in his Bhakti Rasamrit Sindhu, when he talks about practice of Raganuga Sadhana, he says, Krishnam smaran janam chasya preshtam nija samihitam tattat kataratischasav kuryad vasam vraje sada. So he describes what constitutes Raganuga Sadhana. Krishnam smaran, remembering Krishna, which there is a level of spontaneity in that. It's not like he is sitting and, nodding his head back and forth, really trying hard to remember Krishna. There is a level of spontaneity there, right? Cha asya preshtam nijasamihitam janam smaran. Not only meditating on Krishna, but meditating on the association of Krishna in Vrindavan according to the rasa that he is aspiring after. Okay. And then tattat kataratascha, and he becomes very deeply interested in hearing the subject matter connected to those pastimes. Kuryad vasam vraje sada, and he always aspires to stay in Vrindavan. So this Smaranam is, this Smaranatmika Bhakti is characteristic of Raganuga Sadhana. Whereas Vaidhi Sadhana Bhakti is characterized by Shravana, Kirtana, Archanatmika Bhakti predominantly, because that involves the external senses. So to engage the external senses is easier. To engage the mind is much more difficult, right? So therefore, in describing even Sadhana Bhakti, Raganuga Sadhana Bhakti, Srila Prabhupada in his Nectar of Instruction, verse number 8, commentary, purport, Srila Prabhupada says, talks about this Shravana Dasha, Varana Dasha, Smarana Dasha, Apana Dasha and Sampatti Dasha. The stages of Raganuga Sadhana. Also in that, the third level is only Smaranam. And within Smaranam, there are 5 subdivisions which Srila Prabhupada talks about. Smarana, Dharana, Dhyana, Dhruvanusmriti and Samadhi. So these are deeper and deeper levels of engaging the mind in the Nama, Rupa, Guna and Leela of Krishna, which has some prerequisites. There are 2 prerequisites for Smaranam or Dhyanam, engagement of mind. Okay. The first is purity of heart. Unless there is purity of heart, to meditate on Krishna is difficult. And the second is, one needs some level of attachment to Krishna, which means we must have some knowledge about Krishna, his pastimes, like that. So, 2 things which are required for Smaranam, a natural Smaranam, is Anartha Nivritti and Artha Pravritti. So, some level of Anartha Nivritti is a prerequisite for Smaranam. And some level of Artha Pravritti. By Artha Pravritti, I mean a favorable attachment to Krishna. Right? So, that develops with the practice of the initial limbs. So this is what actually Srila Narottam Das Thakur also mentions. Vishaya chadiya kabe shuddha habe man, kabe hama herebo Shri Vrindavan. Srila Prabhupada translating this verse, he says, when the mind is completely purified, being freed from material anxieties and desires, then I shall be able to understand Vrindavan and the conjugal love of Radha and Krishna, and then my spiritual life will be successful. This is a very bhavartha translation of Srila Prabhupada. So some level of anartha nivritti is critical. Like this is just like, I'll give a very mundane example. Let's say if woman falls in love with a man or a man falls in love with a woman prior to marriage. Okay. And due to circumstances, they have to get married to some other person. Okay. So now, what decides how deep that new relationship will become? It depends on two things. First is how completely the woman or the man is able to forget their past relationship. Because as long as that remains, the mind will naturally be carried to that. And when the mind is not there in a relationship, then the relationship does not blossom if the mind is elsewhere, right? And the second thing is that one is how completely one is able to forget the past relationship, and how properly one is trying to water the roots of the new relationship. So that is artha pravritti. So both are needed. So how does one water the root? So this anartha nivritti is what we are talking about. We all have a past relationship with the material world, our paramour. And it is very, very strong. And we are now trying to establish a relationship with Krishna. So how can we remember Krishna if the memories of the paramour is very strong? So unless a particular level of anartha nivritti happens, cleansing of those impressions, it is very difficult to remember Krishna. And the second thing, how does one develop that relationship with Krishna? Because here we are specifically talking about remembering Krishna. Srila Narottam Das Thakur says in the next paragraph, Rupa Raghunatha Pade Haibe Akuti Kabe Hama Bujabose Yugala Piriti. Prabhupada gives a very beautiful understanding of this. The literal translation of this is, whenever I develop attachment to the lotus feet of Rupa Raghunath, then I shall be able to properly understand the loving affairs of Radha and Krishna. But what does it mean to develop attachment to the lotus feet of Rupa Raghunath? Srila Prabhupada again gives a very beautiful Bhavartha translation of this verse. He says, when shall I be very much eager to study the books left by the 6 Goswamis, headed by Srila Rupa Goswami and Srila Raghunath Das Goswami? So this is, in Prabhupada's explanation, Rupa Raghunatha Pade Haibe Akuti. How does one develop attachment to the lotus feet of Rupa Raghunath? If we become attached to their writings and allow our mind to be guided by their writings, then Kabe Hama Bujabose Yugala Piriti. Then I shall be able to understand the loving affairs of Radha and Krishna. So smaranam, it involves these very two important principles which take time. So therefore, at the stage of Raganuga sadhana, smaranam becomes a little bit more natural, because Raganuga sadhana generally starts beyond Nishta. So if Nishta is not accomplished, smaranam is very difficult. It's not very natural. And how do we know if we have reached Nishta? Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur in his Madhurya Kadambini gives 5 symptoms of Nishta. He says, Nishta is characterized by absence of 5 things: Laya, Vikshepa, Apratipatti, Rasaswada and Kashaya. Right? So Laya means feeling sleepy while chanting, hearing, etc. That indicates, if we feel sleepy, it indicates that we are not yet there, right? Vikshepa means distraction. If we feel distracted while chanting, hearing and other such activities, that is also a symptom of anartha nivritti not having reached the threshold where we can practice steady devotional service. The third is apratipatti. Apratipatti means occasional distaste for Krishna conscious activities. मन नहीं लगता है बीच बीच में. अरे आज today I don't have a mood to hear Bhagavatam class. thoda chutti, like that. So occasional. Of course, if it is permanent, then, it's a different thing, right? So then the fourth is kashaya. Kashaya means tendency towards past bad habits, lust, anger, envy, greed, etc. If it is still there, if it is still persistent, then it is an indication that we are not close to Nishta. And the fifth is rasaswada. Rasaswada means whenever there is an opportunity for sense gratification, we are not able to focus on Krishna consciousness. So, or the activities of Krishna consciousness. So, if these 5 symptoms are there, it is very likely that the person has not reached Nishta. And if he has not reached Nishta, smaranam will be very difficult. So, therefore, smaranam is more of a symptom of advancement rather than a means, at least in the initial stages. Later it becomes the means also, but in the early stages it becomes the symptom or the pinnacle of advancement. That is why whenever Krishna promises his abode, he talks about smaranam, not kirtanam or shravanam. He says, Antakalecha mameva smaran muktva kalevaram yaprayati samadbhavam yati nastetra samshaya. Right? So he talks about smaranam. And then again he generalizes that principle by telling yam yam vapi smaran bhavam tejatyante kalevaram tam tameva iti kaunteya sadatad bhava bhavita. Because whatever you remember, because remembrance is very difficult. And at the time of death, it's all the more difficult. That is why even King Kulashekar, he says, Prana prayana samaye kafavata pittaihi kantavarodana vidau smaranam kutaste. So smaranam is very difficult at the time of death. Shravanam is possible. Kirtanam to some extent may be possible. Smaranam is very difficult. That is why if one is able to, so why do we chant when someone is leaving their body? So that somehow or other it can inspire some smaranam, which is very difficult. Unless there is purity of heart and a favorable attachment to Krishna. So if attachment to Krishna is not there, if attachment is there for things of this world, people of this world, then that Krishna smaranam is very difficult. Krishna shravanam is possible at the time of death. That can actually ensure a favorable destination, but not the abode of the Lord. So Krishna does not say, whoever hears my holy name at the time of death is guaranteed, a position in his abode. That is guaranteed if one is able to remember. And remembrance is not easy. That is why Krishna also, after telling Antakalecha mameva, he says that tasmat sarveshu kaleshu mam anusmara yudhyacha. So he says, therefore at all times you remember me and fight. Because unless you remember me at all times, you will not be able to remember me at the time of death. Because remembering at the time of death is very difficult. Then he says, oh, remembering you all the time is difficult. So he says, Abhyasa yoga yuktena chetasa nanyagamina paramam purusham divyam yati partana chintayan. Abhyas karo. Practice to remember me at all the time. Okay. And one of the powerful means of practicing to remember Krishna is what we are doing right now. Shravanam Kirtanam. Therefore, in Brihad Bhagavatamrita also, when the Vaikuntavasis, they meet Gopakumar, and this conversation is happening in Brahma Jyoti. So, they very clearly tell for Gopakumar, don't attempt Smaranatmika Bhakti. Do Kirtanatmika Bhakti. Because Kirtanatmika Bhakti is most powerful. And he says that this Kirtanatmika Bhakti, actually, you may think that it involves only one of the senses, which is the tongue. But it also involves the ear, and it also pulls the mind. It keeps the mind absorbed. Smaranam is not easy, right? So therefore, they say like that. So this is not in a sense of comparing two limbs of devotional service, but you have to discuss the practical difficulties of practicing particular limbs at particular stages. Otherwise, these limbs are very complementary limbs. They complement each other. So they say, Sankirtanad dhyana sukam vivardate. Dhyanad sankirtana madhuri sukam. So they say, they complement each other. Sankirtanad dhyana sukam vivardate. By Sankirtan, by practicing Sankirtan, one's joy of meditation increases. And by meditation, one's joy of Sankirtan increases. So in this way, they complement each other. Okay. So therefore, in one sense, but having said that, in the early stages, Shravana Kirtana Archanatmika Bhakti is actually recommended for in the early stages of devotional service. Not that one should not attempt remembering. Any practice that we do has to be done with absorption. Because ultimately it does not depend on the limb that much. It depends more on how absorbed we are in performing that limb. Because it is absorption which leads to purification, either anartha nivritti or artha pravritti. It depends on absorption. With a heart full of anarthas, absorbing in the limb of smaranam is very difficult. But to absorb in kirtan is easier, or shravanam is easier. So therefore, otherwise, for us, we are at a situation where we look at things connected to Krishna, it reminds us of our material attachments. Right? And but for exalted devotees, when they look at material things, it reminds them of Krishna. Stavara jangamadeki nadeki taramurti sarvatra hoy nija ishtadeva spurti. For us, when we look at Ishtadev, it might probably remind us of our material relationships, material attachments. Right? That is why Srila Rupa Goswami in his Padyavali quotes this verse. Yuvatinam yata yunau yunau cha yuvatau yata tatabi manobi ramate tadvat manome ramatam tvai. So he says, just like a young woman is attracted to a young man and a young man is attracted to a young woman, in the same way let my mind be attracted to you. And this is quoted by Srila Rupa Goswami as an example of a Samprarthanatmika prayer in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. So, Samprarthanatmika prayer is a very practical prayers offered by struggling sadhakas. Right? Lalsamayi are the kind of prayers which are offered by perfected devotees. So, Shama Gori Ange Dibo Chandanera Ganda Chamara Dulabo Kabe Heri Mukha Chanda. That is like the aspiration of Manjaris. But for us, practical, where am I? I can relate to the attraction between a male and female. So that is our situation. Whereas when Vamshidas Babaji, when he used to look at, in those days, coal-fired engines, he used to run behind them shouting, Sham Sundar, like that, So, because, the coal, the coal soot would have made that engine completely black. So he looks at engine and it reminds him of Sham Sundar. But that's not our case, right? So therefore, smaranam is possible only with sufficient anartha nivritti and artha pravritti, right? So how do we reach that level of smaranam? There are two books in our sampradaya which are considered to be the paddhati, the gradual instructions are given as to gradually how you can elevate yourself from the level of complete material absorption to the level of absorption in Krishna. These two books are Nectar of Instruction, Upadeshamrita by Srila Rupa Goswami, and Manas Siksha by Srila Raghunath Das Goswami. Both are very similar in nature, and they are very complementary. They give the same kind of elevation from material absorption to complete absorption in Krishna. And whatever Nectar of Instruction briefly mentions, Manasiksha elaborates on them. And whatever Manasiksha briefly mentions, Nectar of Devotion, Nectar of Instruction elaborates on that. So in this way, they very nicely complement each other. So what we will try to do now is we will take the template of Manasiksha and try to see how gradual elevation from material absorption to Krishna Smaranam is described there. So we may skip some of the later verses which go beyond Smaranam, which talk about Bhava and Prema, how to reach that. So Manasiksha starts with Adau Shraddha. Once one has received that seed of devotion, what is the first thing that is expected of such a person? Okay. So what should a person who has accepted devotional service, what is the first thing he should do? What is the first endeavor? So Srila Raghunath Das Goswami says that that person should endeavor to give up his material designations and try to develop spiritual designation. So he says, Gurau Goshte Goshtala Yishu Sujane Bhusuragane Swamantre Shri Namni Vrajanava Yuvadvandva Sharane Sada Dambam Hitva Kururatima Purvamatitaram Aesvantar Bratas Chatubirabiyache Dritapada. So he says two things. One is Kuru Apurvam Atitaram Ratim. So he says, try to develop unprecedented attraction to these 8 things. What are the 8 things? He says, Gurau. Gurau means the Siksha Guru and Diksha Guru. So one has to develop attraction, because if we want to develop a relationship with Krishna, we have to establish relationship with those connected with Krishna. Aradhananam sarvesham Vishnor aradhanam param tasmat parataram devi tadiyanam samarchanam. So to develop attachment to Krishna's tadiya is very critical if we want to establish a relationship with Krishna. So the first is Gurau. We have to develop attachment to our Shiksha Guru and Diksha Guru. Meaning we have to understand the importance of Siksha and Diksha in our life. How important they are in progressing. Okay. Then Goshte. Goshte means we have to develop some relationship with Vrindavan. Because ultimately our goal is Vrindavan. And that attachment does not automatically happen. That is why here he says Atitaram Kuru. Atitaram Kuru means make excessive endeavor to develop that attachment. The attachment will not automatically develop. Then Goshtala Yishu. Goshtala Yishu means the residents of Vrindavan, the Vrajavasis. So we develop attachment to them by hearing about them, by hearing about their love gradually. Sujane. Sujane means Vaishnavas of any sampradayas. So one has to have an attachment to all Vaishnavas, but here Goshtalayishu Sujane Bhusuragane. Bhusuragane means Brahmanas. But the attachment should be in that order. Highest attachment to the Vrajavasis, and then to the Vaishnavas, and then to the Brahmanas. One has to endeavor to develop attachment. Attachment, how do you develop to the Brahmanas? By appreciating their contribution to maintaining the law of the Lord in this material world. Gurau goshte goshtalayeshu sujane bhusuragane swamantre. Swamantre refers to the Gayatri mantra that one receives from the Guru. So, how does one develop attachment to the Gayatri? By understanding the meaning of Gayatri, by understanding how this Gayatri is an extension of the holy name. So therefore, many times we think Harinam, is Harinam important or the Gayatri mantra important? Actually, the Gayatri mantra is the expansion of the holy name, the Gayatri that we receive in our Sampradaya. So the Gayatri mantra that we receive in our Sampradaya is actually an entrance into Raganuga sadhana actually. This is not just something that reminds us that we are Brahmanas. Because the first mantra that we are taught after receiving the Brahmin thread is Naham Vipro na Chanarapati Napi Vaishyo na Shudro. Naham Varni na Chagrahapati na Vanasto Yatirva. Right? Kintu Prodyan Nikila Paramananda Purnamritabder Gopi Bhartur Padakamalayur Dasa Dasanudas. And the Gayatri that we receive is not a reminder of our Varna, but it is a reminder of our Upadhi as servant of Krishna. And what are the details of that relationship? Gayatri mentions that. Whereas the holy name is generic, the Gayatri is more specific. So one develops attraction. One has to establish a relationship with the Gayatri mantra. Swamantre Shri Namni, with the holy name. And Vraja Navayuva Dvandva Sharane. And one should also develop an attraction to the process of surrendering to the divine couple of Vrindavan. And then he says, one should develop Apurva Rati. Apurva means unprecedented. In this world, we have had attachment to many material things, material people. But Srila Raghunath Das Goswami says, your attachment to these 8 personalities should not be like that. So how? He says Apurva Rati. Apurva Rati means, it could mean multiple things. One of the things it means is that our attachment to things of this world were on the platform of false ego. Our identification with our body. But your attachment to these 8 things should not be on the platform of false ego. It should be on the platform of true ego. Jivera Swarupohoy Krishnera Nityadas. So, and also Apurva Rati also means all our material attachments were selfish. The attachment to these 8 things should involve selflessness. So that is also another meaning of Apurva Rati. And Apurva Rati also means that our endeavor should be to develop a kind of attachment to these 8 things with such an intensity that kind of intensity we never had with any object or person of this material world. So in this way, there has to be endeavor. That's what he says, Atitaram Kuru. The attachment is not going to automatically develop. Okay. And then he says, not only that, Sada Dambam Hitva. While trying to develop this new Upadhi, while trying to water this new Upadhi, you should consciously try to give up your old Upadhis. Like we saw the example of a man who had already a relationship with a woman gets married to someone else. So he has to try to forget his past Upadhi. That is described here as Sada Dambam Hitva. So Dambam literally means pride. But more critically here, Dambam refers to the Upadhis. Because our pride is dependent on our Upadhis. Okay. I am proud of my singing because I identify myself as a singer. I am proud of my teaching skills because my Upadhi is that I am a teacher. So sada dambam hitva means, so give up pride translates to sarvopadi vinirmuktam. Right? And there are many aspects of pride which manifest in the form of the various anarthas. So from verse number 4 to 7, Srila Rupa Goswami will describe about how these various aspects of damba are given up. Okay, like that. So, and then he says sada. Sada means always give up your damba, which means giving up your damba is not an event, it's a process. You give it up, it comes. It's not like, give up your towel, you remove your towel and throw it, it's gone. But damba does not go away like that. Our material upadhis don't go away like that. It's a process, right? So, this is the first verse in which he says, endeavor to establish a spiritual upadhi and gradually try to give up your material upadhis. So, this endeavor is what defines our entrance into bhakti. Utsahan, nischayat, dhairyat. An enthusiasm to establish these relationships and determination to remain steadfast in that, and also being patient, because anartha nivritti and artha pravritti both are slow processes, right? Like that. Then in the next verse, Srila Raghunath Das Goswami says about the next thing that a sadhaka should do is to change his paradigm of thinking, feeling and willing. Right? We all enter into the realm of bhakti with different paradigm of thinking, feeling and willing. Most of us have entered into bhakti with the paradigm of whatever I like I will do, whatever I don't like I will not do. Raga dvesha. Ragasya sankalpo, dveshasya varjanam. Right? Or some others who were brought up in a little bit more pious, dharmic family, they may say, dharmasya sankalpo, adharmasya varjanam. Whatever is dharmic I will accept, whatever is adharma I will reject. So, Srila Raghunath Das Goswami says, whatever may be the paradigm with which you have entered bhakti, you have to change it. What is that paradigm? He says, na dharmam shruti gana niruktam kila kuru vraje Radha Krishna prachura paricharyam mihatanu shachi sunum nandishvara pati sutatve guruvaram mukunda preshtatve smarapadamajasram nanumana. So he says, na dharmam kuru. Do not be attached to performing dharma. Na adharmam kuru. Do not be attached to performing adharma. Which means, don't think in terms of dharma and adharma. Then what should I think? Vraje Radha Krishna prachura paricharyam ihatanu. What should I do to enhance my service to Radha and Krishna in Vrindavan? So which means, the consideration of accepting and rejecting, which the mind does, should be based on anukulyasya sankalpo pratikulyasya varjanam. It should not be based on dharma, adharma or raga dvesha. So this has to be a conscious effort. This is what Srila Raghunath Das Goswami is telling his mind. And then he also talks about what is the role of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. If the goal is to establish a relationship with Radha and Krishna in Vrindavan, what is the role of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu? He says, Shachi sonum nandishvara pati sutatve smaramana. My dear mind, understand that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is non-different from Nanda Sunu. Shachi Sunu is the same as Nanda Sunu. Right? Vrajendra Nandana Jai Sachi Sutta Hoilo Sei. Right? And then what is the role of Guru? He says, Guruvaram Mukunda Preshtatve Smaramana. Understand that your Guru is one of the close associates of Radha and Krishna in Vrindavan. So therefore, your attachment to Radha and Krishna is going to be through your Guru. So start seeing your Guru not only as a bona fide representative of the Guru Sishya Parampara, but also start seeing them as having a personal, intimate connection with Radha and Krishna in Vrindavan, so that you will be able to see how the Guru is going to act as a conduit to establishing your relationship with Radha and Krishna. So this change of paradigm as to understanding, how, on what basis we should accept and reject things, and understanding the role of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and Guru in achieving our eternal goal. So once he suggests this change of paradigm, then he talks about a very, very critical parameter, which is chastity to parampara. Because your goal is specific, the means is also specific. You cannot search around here and there. So therefore he says, Yadi cheravasam vrajabu visaragam pratijanur yuvadvandvam tachet paricharitumara swarupam shri rupam saganamiha tasya grajamapi sputam premna nityam smaranamatadatvam shrunumana. So Srila Raghunath Das Goswami says, Yadi chair avasam vrajabuvi saragam pratijanur. My dear mind, if you desire to stay in Vrindavan life after life, with the kind of attachment that the Vrajavasis have towards Krishna, saragam, and while staying there, yuvad dvandvam tachet paricharitum arad abhilashe. While staying in Vrindavan, if your ultimate goal is to get an opportunity to render personal service to Radha and Krishna, if this goal is very clear for you, then the means to attain that goal is only one. Swarupam Shri Rupam Saganam Iha Tasya Grajamapi Sputam Premna Nityam Smara Nama Tadatvam Shrunumana. Then the means to attaining that is to remember and offer obeisances to Swarup Damodar Goswami, Srila Rupa Goswami, Srila Sanatan Goswami and their associates. Meaning, so Smara refers to taking shelter of their teachings. And Nama, offer obeisances, means express your gratitude by putting those teachings into action. So which means our activities should be guided by the writings of our acharyas. Right? So Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, in commenting this, he says that what does this verse talk about? He says, can smaranam for Vraja Krishna come from other sampradayas? So Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur says, in this verse, Srila Raghunath Das Goswami answers this question. And his answer is no. So therefore, especially the mood in which Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu comes to give. So if our goal is specific, the means to attain that is specific. So at some point, at least, we have to be convinced that we have to come back on track and hear from our acharyas. So that chastity is important, right? So that is the third point that he says. Because, so this is gradually what Srila Raghunath Das Goswami is doing, is making everything anukul for Krishna Smaranam. Our paradigm of thinking, feeling and willing will affect our Krishna Smaranam. Our chastity will affect our Krishna Smaranam. Our attachment to Krishna's tadiya will enhance or affect our Krishna Smaranam. Then, next comes the obstacles. The obstacles also have to be removed. Now everything favorable, anukulyasa sankalpa has been done. Now there are many things which are pratikul to Krishna Smaranam. That has to be removed. So what are the things which are pratikul to Krishna Smaranam? Verse number 4 to 7, he talks about the various kinds of anarthas or obstacles, starting from the grossest to the subtlest. So first, in verse 4, he talks about 3 types of gross obstacles. Fourth verse, he says, Asadvarta Veshya visrjamati sarvasvaharani kata mukti vyagrya na shrunu kila sarvatmagilani api tyaktva lakshmi patiratimito vyomanayanim vraje radha krishnau swarati mani dautvam bhajamana. So he says 3 obstacles. Asadvarta. So varta can mean words, varta can mean actions also. Right? So asadvarta means prajalpa in one sense. Give up the various kinds of prajalpa, like useless talk, arguments. Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur in his Bhakti-aloka talks about various types of prajalpa. Useless talks, arguments, gossip, debates, fault finding in others, speaking falsehood, blaspheming devotees, and worldly talk. All of that falls within the category of asadvarta. So Srila Raghunath Das Goswami is comparing asadvarta to Veshya. Veshya means a prostitute. So what does a Veshya do? Mati sarvasva harani. So she steals all the money and makes that person beggar. Right? So similarly, this asadvarta or material talk steals away all of our mati and attraction to Krishna. And Krishna smaranam will not be easy. Varta also means actions. So asadvarta means those actions which enhance our asat trishna. Asat trishna means thirst for material enjoyment. So what are those actions which enhance our thirst for material enjoyment? Atyahara prayasascha prajalpo niyamagraha janasangascha laulyamcha shadbir bhaktir vinashyati. So here Nectar of Instruction elaborates on what that asadvarta is. These 6 things. Second thing he says is kata mukti vyagrya. Mukti kata, talking about liberation. Okay. Either that which the Mayavadis speak, or even in other sampradayas, there is a more enhanced talk about liberation actually. More than prema. Right? So, kata mukti vyagrya. So that mukti kata is compared to a tigress. Generally a tigress, especially when she is around her cubs, is said to be more aggressive than that tiger. Because she has that mamta towards her children. So she is compared to a tigress, and what she will do, sarvatma gilani. She will destroy the soul only. Of course, we know the soul is indestructible. Nainam chindanti shastrani, nainam dahati pavakaha. But she destroys the soul means she completely captures the potential of the soul to serve Krishna. Third thing is a very interesting thing Srila Rupa Goswami says is an obstacle. Api tyaktva lakshmi pati ratim ito vyomanayanim. He says, please give up your attachment to serving Lakshmi Narayan also. He does not say don't serve Lakshmi Narayan. You can serve Lakshmi Narayan, but your attachment should be to serve Radha and Krishna. Why? He says, ito vyomanayanim. Otherwise you will be kidnapped to Vaikunta. You will land up in Vaikunta, while your desire was to land up in Goloka Vrindavan. So therefore, he says, rather, vraje Radha Krishnau swarati manidautvam bhajamana. So therefore, my dear mind, don't be fearful. If you worship Radha and Krishna, reciprocation is guaranteed. They will give up their swarati towards you. Their love will be offered to you by Radha and Krishna. Don't be fearful of worshipping them. So he talks about these 3 obstacles. And then he talks about, I'm just going a little fast. There are a lot of details to it, but just an overview. And then in the next verse, he talks about little more subtler anarthas. So these gross anarthas can be with some willingness given up. The subtler anarthas are a little bit more difficult to give up. The subtler anarthas are the highway robbers. Asacheshta kashta prada vikata pasha libiriha prakamam kamadi prakata patapati vyatikaraihi Gale badva hanye hamiti bakabidvartma pagane kurutvam futkara navati sayatatvam manayita. So he says, asat cheshta means non-Krishna conscious activities which are inspired by lust, anger, envy, greed, illusion and pride. These 6 are compared to the highway robbers. Vyatikaraihi. Vyatikaraihi means a gang of robbers. And they attack the practitioner who is on the path of Krishna's lotus feet. Okay. Gale badva, and they bind the neck of the practitioner with these kashta prada vikata pashalibir asat cheshta, with these troublesome, dreadful ropes of wicked activities inspired by lust, anger, envy, greed, illusion and pride. So this choking of the neck is the choking of the creeper of devotional service through these weeds of lust, anger, envy, greed, illusion and pride. So what is the solution? The solution, he says, hanyeham iti kurutvam futkaran. He says, I am dead. In this way, cry out for help. From whom? He says, Bakabid Vartma Pagane. The protectors of the path leading to Krishna, who is the killer of Bakasur, the devotees. Cry out for help from the devotees, and when you cry out for help, they will come and drive these enemies away. So now, of course, there are many things that we could discuss here, but what does it mean to cry out for help from devotees? One thing is opening our heart to the devotees and sharing this thing. But to do that, we need to have a relationship of trust where we know for sure that the person is a genuine well-wisher and confidentiality will be maintained. So that needs investment. And investment, how do we invest? Srila Rupa Goswami says, Dadati, Pratigrinnati, Guhyamakyati Prachati, Bhungte Bojayate Cheva Shadvidam Priti Lakshanam. That is the investment. And while investing in this way, Rupa Goswami also says, we should be careful about one thing. Drishtair, Swabhava Janitair, Vapushascha Doshair, Naprakritatvamiha, Bhakta Janasya Pashet. Gangambasam Nakalu Budbuddha Fena Pankair, Brahmadravatvam Apagachati Niradharmair. He says, when we want help from the devotees, but when we approach the devotees, we may see their material conditioned side. If you don't learn to neglect their material conditioned side, then you will get affected by it. If you get affected by it, you will not seek their association. If you don't seek their association, you will not be able to overcome these highway robbers. Right? So, therefore, in order to be able to cry to the devotees, we should actually make the initial investment in actually establishing a relationship so that we feel comfortable going and crying to a devotee. Right? It also means in the association we are safe. Alone, we are always vulnerable to the highway robbers. That is a more grosser understanding. At one level, this is also a meaning. Alone, we are vulnerable. In the association, we are protected. Okay. Then, in the next verse, he says, you may be able to overcome the anarthas of lust, anger, envy, greed, delusion, and pride, but still, the subtler anartha of hypocrisy and duplicity may remain. Because anartha nivritti is not complete. You have not completely become free of anarthas. There may be some lust, some anger, some greed remaining. You might want to hide it from others. So, he says, Are cheta prodyat kapata kutinati bharakara ksharan mutre snatva dahasi katamatma namapimam sadatvam gandharva giridari pada prema vilasat Sudambodau snatva swamapi nitaram cha sukaya. So here Srila Raghunath Das Goswami says, he is threatening his mind. Oh, my dear mind, I understand that you want to become pure. We become pure by taking bath. But why you are trying to take bath in this trickling donkey's urine of, he says, full-blown hypocrisy and duplicity. Prodyat kapata kutinati. So, Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur says, hypocrisy means pretending to have some attitude which has public approval. So, just for public approval, showing some attitude or some behavior. And duplicity means speaking something and doing something else, or telling one thing to one person and another thing to another person. This is duplicity. So he's telling his mind that I understand and I trust that you want to purify yourself. But then your ways are counterproductive to your goal. You are trying to take bath in this trickling donkey's urine of... So we take bath for two purposes. It first cools down the body, and second, it cleanses our body. But donkey's urine, even though it is liquid, but it burns. It's highly acidic. And also, it is very impure, not like cow urine, right? So, therefore, he says, instead, so what is the solution for overcoming this hypocrisy and duplicity? He says, Sadatvam Gandharva Giridari Pada Prema Vilasat Sudambodau Snatva. So rather you take bath in the nectarian ocean of glorification of Radha and Krishna. So if you get absorbed in glorifying the divine couple, because the main reason for hypocrisy and duplicity is self-absorption. So to overcome this self-absorption, we need to have a higher absorption in glorifying Radha and Krishna. So when you develop that taste and habit, then one can overcome the problem of this hypocrisy and duplicity. So then, all said and done, what is the root cause of this hypocrisy and duplicity? He says the root cause of that is more subtler. That is pratishta asha. Desire for fame. Desire for name, fame, glorification. When the desire for name, fame, glorification is there, then naturally we want to hide our weaknesses and we want to project our strengths, advertise it. So he says, Pratishta sha drishta shvapacha ramani me hridi natet katam sadhu prema sprishati shuchiretan nanumana sada tvam sevasva prabudayita samantamatulam yata tam nishkasya tvaritam tam veshayati saha. So he compares this Pratishta Asha to an unchaste dog-eating woman, who dances within the heart. This desire for name, fame, recognition. As long as she dances within the heart, he says, Katam sadhus prema sprishati. How can sadhu prema touch the heart? So sadhu prema means three things. The love that the sadhu has for Radha and Krishna. Our heart cannot touch as long as our heart is burning with this Pratishta Asha. Second thing he says, Sadhu Prema means the love that the sadhu has towards me. Because the sadhu has compassion towards me. But I will not be able to see it as long as my heart is absorbed with this desire for name, fame, glorification. I will not be able to see. And the third meaning of Sadhu Prema is that as a sadhaka, I also have a potential to love a sadhu. But I will not be able to realize that love that I have for the sadhu as long as the heart is consumed by this Pratishta Asha. So what is the solution? He says, Sadatvam sevasva prabudayita samanta matulam. So develop this attraction to serve a very exalted devotee. So he says, Prabhudaita Samantam Atulam, the incomparable beloved devotee, commander of Krishna's army, an Uttamadhikari. So how do you identify Uttamadhikari? Srila Rupa Goswami says in NOI, Krishneti yasya giritam manasadriyeta dikshastichet pranatibhischa bhajantamisham shushrushaya bhajana vigyam ananyam anya nindadi shunya hridamipsita sangalabdya. So who is that Prabhudaita Samantam? One who has unflinching attraction to Krishna, bhajana vigyam, he is an expert in the Sambandha, Abhidaya and Prayojana of Bhakti. And Anya Nindadi Shunya Hridam, whose heart is completely freed from the propensity to criticize others. So, and how do you serve him? Shushrushaya, by seeking his association and serving him favorably, we overcome this desire for Pratishta Asha. Because when we come in touch with such a devotee and serve him, we will understand that he deserves all this name, fame, glorification, and not me. It makes us humble. So now that Pratishta Asha is gone, then someone may say that, okay, Sadhu Sangha is not very easily available for me. So what should I do? So in the next verse he says that then depend on Krishna's mercy. So if you depend on Krishna's mercy, then he says that Krishna's mercy, even in the absence of active Sadhu Sangha, can bestow us three things. He says, Dushtatvam me davayati. It can destroy the wickedness in our heart in the form of these various anarthas. Premamritam mahyam dadati. It can give us this premamrita, the nectar of prema. And Shri Gandharva Bhajana Vidaye Mam Prerayati. It can inspire in my heart a desire to serve Radha and Krishna in Vrindavan. So Krishna's mercy is also important along with mercy of the Vaishnavas. So dependence on Krishna's mercy is indicated in verse 8. And finally, in the 8th verse, we will end with that. When all of this is accomplished, then smaranam and dhyanam is possible. So then how do you meditate? Right? So Krishna says, Srila Rupa Goswami says in Nectar of Instruction, Tan nama rupa charitadi sukirtananu smrityor kramena rasana manasi niyojya Tishtan vraje tadanuraga jananugami kalam nayet tadakilam iti upadeshasaram. The essence of all instruction is that kramena rasana manasi niyojya. Starting with the senses, learn to engage your mind also in tan nama rupa charita adi, name, fame, qualities, pastimes, etc. of Krishna. Smrityor. So now smaranam comes. And at what stage? He says, Tad anuraga jananugami. When you are ready for practicing raganuga sadhana bhakti. And in the previous verse he says, for that you have to reach the stage of ruchi. Swadvi kramat bhavati tad gada mula hantri. He says in the previous verse. So then, when you reach that stage, how do you meditate? We will end with this one verse. In the verse 9 he says, how do you meditate? Madishana tatve vraja vipina chandram vrajavane shwarim tanna tatve tadatula sakitve tulalitam vishakam shikshali vitarana gurutve priyasaro girindrau tatpreksha lalitarati datve smaramana. So here he says, we should meditate on Krishna. How does one meditate? Madishana tatve. So this is the specific mode of Gaudiya Vaishnavism. Madishana tatve. He is the Lord of my leader. My leader is Srimati Radharani. So I meditate on Krishna as the Lord of my leader. And then how do I meditate on Radharani, Srimati Radharani? Vrajavaneshwarim tanna tatve. I meditate on Srimati Radharani as the most dear object of love of Krishna. Then how do I meditate on Lalita Devi? Tad atula sakitve tu lalitam. One meditates on Lalita Devi as the incomparable friend of Srimati Radharani. So you meditate on Krishna with respect to Radharani. You meditate on Radharani, and then you meditate on Lalita with respect to Lalita Devi with respect to Srimati Radharani. Vishakam Shikshali Vidarana Gurutve. And you meditate on Srimati Vishaka Devi as the one who disseminates or teaches the signs of loving Radha and Krishna to others. And you also meditate on two more things. Priya Saro, the Priya Saras, the dear Kunda of Srimati Radharani, which is Radha Kund. And Girindrau, Govardhan. And how do you meditate on them? Tat Preksha Lalita Rati Datve. As they give two things. The Priya Saras and Girindrau. What do they give? They give first darshan of pastimes of Radha and Krishna. And second thing, Lalita Rati. They give attraction to Radha and Krishna when we take shelter of them. Smaramana. So this is guided meditation. Guided smaranam or dhyanam, whichever way you might want to see. But before this 9th verse, there are 8 other verses. When gradually one crosses through them, then smaranam becomes very favorable. Till then, to assist that smaranam, one should very firmly fix oneself in kirtanam, shravanam and archanam. So that is the recommendation of our acharyas. So thank you all very much for your patient listening. Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai. Hare Krishna. Thank you very much.